I poured myself a second cup of coffee that morning and stood at the kitchen window, watching the snow fall on the backyard. My daughter was getting married in 6 hours. I should have been happy. I was happy. Mostly. But there was something sitting in my chest that I couldn't quite name yet. Maybe I already knew. My daughter, I'll call her by what she is to me, my girl, had been with her fiancé for 3 years. He was kind enough, quiet, the type who refilled your glass before you noticed it was empty. I liked him. I still like him. The story isn't about him. It's about his brother. His brother's name is Conrad. Conrad is 44 years old, works in commercial real estate in Calgary, drives a truck that costs more than my first house, and has never, not once in 3 years, looked at me like I was a person worth looking at. He would shake my hand at Christmas and immediately turn to talk to someone else. He called me the mother-in-law when speaking about me in front of me, as in, the mother-in-law made the potato salad while pointing at me with his fork. No name, no acknowledgement, just a category. I told myself it was nothing. I'm 63 years old. I survived worse than a man with an expensive truck and bad manners. But that dinner, I didn't see that coming. My daughter and her fiancé decided to have both families meet for Christmas dinner before the wedding in February. Neutral ground, my daughter said. A restaurant, so nobody has to cook or clean, nobody feels territorial. I thought that was smart. I thought she had thought of everything. The restaurant was a steakhouse in downtown Calgary. Private room in the back, long table, candles, the whole thing. Beautiful, actually. My daughter had arranged white roses in the center because she knows I love white roses. I noticed that and felt a rush of something warm behind my eyes. She thinks of people. She always has. His family arrived after us. Mother, father, Conrad, Conrad's wife Paulette, their 2 kids, and an aunt who I believe was there mostly to witness things. They were well dressed, not in a festive way, in an assessment way, like they had coordinated their outfits for a job interview, not a family dinner. Conrad's mother, his mother, not mine, sat at the head of the table without being invited to. She simply walked to that chair, set down her handbag, and sat. My daughter looked at me across the table with an expression I recognized from when she was 7 and another kid had taken her lunch at school. I smiled at her. I mouthed, "It's fine. We ordered. We made small talk." His father talked about a ski trip. Paulette talked about a ski trip. Paulette talked about their kitchen renovation. I talked about my garden and got a polite nod from the aunt. Then his mother asked, sweetly, how I was managing now that my daughter was leaving. I said I was proud of her, that I'd raised her to build her own life. She nodded very slowly, the kind of nod that means that's a nice way of putting it. Then she said, "It must be such a change for you both. She's stepping into quite a different world now." I put down my fork. "Different how?" I asked. She smiled. She had the smile of someone who had been practicing that particular smile for decades. "Well, she's always worked so hard. Given where she started." Given where she started. I want you to sit with that phrase for a moment, because I had to. My daughter grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Red Deer. Her father and I both worked. I was an administrator at a medical clinic for 22 years. Her father drove for a trucking company until his back gave out. Then he retrained as a dispatcher. We weren't wealthy. We bought secondhand when we had to. My daughter wore her cousin's winter coat for 2 years in middle school and never once complained about it. We took vacations to provincial parks and called it camping, and she loved it. She also graduated with honors, got her accounting designation on her first attempt, pays her own rent, her own bills, has a healthy RRSP at 31, because I made sure she understood money before she understood most other things. Where she started was a good home, a real home. I knew what Conrad's mother was implying. I knew it, and every person at that table knew it, and the room went slightly too quiet in the way rooms do when something has been said that can't be unsaid. My daughter looked at her plate. Her shoulders dropped about half an inch. Just half an inch. But I am her mother, and I have been watching those shoulders for 31 years, and I know exactly what that means. I looked at Conrad. He was cutting his steak. He didn't look up. I looked at his mother. She was reaching for her wine, and I thought about a folder sitting in the filing cabinet in my home office. A brown accordion folder, elastic band around it, labeled in my own handwriting. I'd been keeping it for 14 months. I hadn't planned to open it at Christmas dinner. But my daughter's shoulders dropped half an inch and I made a decision. "You know," I said, and my voice was very calm. "That's interesting, because I've actually been doing a bit of research into your family. Just background, the way any mother would." Conrad's mother set down her wine. "I wanted to understand what world my daughter was stepping into," I said. "Your words." His father cleared his throat. Conrad finally looked up. I looked directly at Conrad's mother and I said, "I understand the property on Elbow Drive is technically still in your husband's name, despite the refinancing in 2021. Complete silence. "I also understand that the condo in Canmore, the one Conrad manages, hasn't had the appropriate short-term rental licensing since the city bylaw changed in 2023. That's something the municipality takes quite seriously now." Conrad put down his fork. "And I know," I said, still very calm, still holding eye contact with his mother, "that the company Conrad used to purchase the land near Cochrane last spring, the numbered company, has your daughter-in-law Paulette listed as sole director, which would be relevant if anyone were to look into the GST filing discrepancy from Q3. Paulette made a small sound. "I'm not saying any of this is intentional," I said. "I'm sure it's all just administrative oversight. Things get complicated. I know a very good tax lawyer in Edmonton if anyone needs a referral." His mother's face had gone from cream to something closer to gray. I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip. I set it back down. "My daughter grew up in a house where we told the truth about money," I said. "Where we filed our taxes correctly and slept at night. Where we taught her that what you own is not who you are. She isn't stepping into a better world. She's bringing a better foundation into yours. And I genuinely hope, that your family recognizes what that's worth." I looked at my daughter then. She was staring at me. Her eyes were wet. She looked the way she looked when she was 7 and I had sorted out the lunch situation. Not relief exactly, but something that sat next to it. "Now," I said, turning back to the table, "who wants dessert? I heard the creme brulee is excellent." Nobody ordered dessert. The dinner ended about 20 minutes later. His parents left first, then Conrad and Paulette, then the aunt, who paused in my chair on her way out and said quietly, "Good for you," before disappearing into her coat. My daughter and I sat alone at the table for a while after. The waiter brought us each a piece of chocolate cake that we hadn't ordered. "On the house," he said, and he gave me a look that told me the staff had heard everything through the wall. My daughter said, "Mom, how did you know all of that?" I told her it wasn't magic. It was public records and a lot of patience. Conrad's brother, her fiancé, had mentioned the Canmore property at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Paulette had mentioned the numbered company in a Facebook comment on a local business group she forgot was public. The licensing issue I found through the City of Calgary's short-term rental registry, which is online, searchable, and updated monthly. The property records and the refinancing were on the Alberta Land Title Database, available to anyone who wants to look. "I wasn't trying to burn them down," I told her. "I was trying to make sure they knew I see them clearly." She asked me if I had been planning that speech. I said no. That was true. I had the information because I believe a mother should know who her daughter is marrying into. I had never intended to use it. I had hoped never to need to. But her shoulders dropped half an inch, and I am her mother. She leaned her head on my shoulder right there at the restaurant table, and we stayed like that for a while. Long after the candles had been blown out, long after the staff had quietly cleared around us, long after the white roses had started to droop slightly in the warmth of the room. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm glad you did. I'm 63 years old. I raised my daughter alone after her father's accident. I managed a medical clinic. I learned to fix a leaking tap myself because I couldn't always afford a plumber. I replanted my backyard garden 3 times after bad winters. I have learned over 6 decades that dignity is not something anyone gives you. You carry it with you or you don't have it at all." My daughter carried hers into that room. She sat at that table and smiled and made polite conversation and wore her dignity so naturally that I don't think she even realized she was doing it. His mother saw her and saw a category, where she started, as if a starting point is a ceiling. I have never believed that, not once. Not for myself, and certainly not for my daughter. The wedding went ahead in February. It was small, 112 people, held at a heritage hall in Calgary with Edison lights strung across the ceiling. My daughter's dress was ivory and she looked like herself, which is the best thing a person can look like on their wedding day. Her husband, and he is a good man, I want to say that again, held her hand during the vows and his voice cracked on the word always, and I forgave him for his family in that moment. Conrad gave a toast. It was short. He mentioned his brother's generosity and his love for my daughter, and he welcomed her to the family. He did not look at me while he spoke. I did not need him to. His mother sat across the aisle from me during the ceremony. She wore a navy dress and pearl earrings, and she did not make eye contact with me once. When we passed each other at the reception, she said, "Lovely evening," and I said, "Yes, it is," and we both moved on. That is enough. That is actually enough. Some people change. Some people just learn not to say the thing they're thinking. Either way, the effect on my daughter is the same. She doesn't have to sit at a table and hear her life described as a charitable upgrade. That matters more to me than anyone's transformation. What I want to say, if anyone is listening, is this: the information I had wasn't ammunition. It was preparation. There is a difference. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was trying to make clear, very clearly, that I had done my homework. That I know who I am dealing with. That my daughter did not arrive at that table without someone watching her back. That is my job. It has been my job for 31 years, and I suspect it will be my job for another 30 if my knees hold out. I drove home from that Christmas dinner through a light snowfall. The roads were quiet. The radio was playing something instrumental, something with a lot of piano. I thought about the folder in my filing cabinet and whether I needed to keep it anymore. I decided to keep it anymore. Out of threat. Just because knowledge is weight you want to hold, not throw away. There's no way to know what you'll need to know. My daughter called me the next morning to say thank you again. Then she asked, "Mom, is there anything you don't know about us? Like, is there a file on me somewhere?" I laughed for a long time. There isn't a file. But there is 31 years of paying attention, of knowing when her shoulders drop half an inch, of knowing white roses over red, of knowing the exact sound her voice makes when she's trying not to cry. No filing cabinet required for any of that. I went into my backyard that morning and I looked at the snow over my garden beds and I thought about what I would plant in the spring. Tomatoes, probably. The same heritage variety I've grown for 15 years that Conrad's mother would probably describe as a humble beginning. I think they're the best tomatoes I've ever tasted, and I sleep very well at night. I've been thinking about that Christmas dinner a lot lately, not with anger. The anger passed somewhere around March, around the time my daughter sent me a photo of her new kitchen with a little succulent on the windowsill that I'd given her as a housewarming gift. I looked at that photo for a long time. The anger had already quietly packed its bags by then. What I think about now is the folder. I didn't start keeping it out of suspicion. I started keeping it because I'm a woman who spent 22 years managing a medical clinic, and in that work you learn very quickly that the people who cause the most damage are rarely the ones who announce themselves. They're the ones who assume nobody is paying attention. Conrad assumed nobody was paying attention. That assumption was the thing that undid him. Not me. Not my folder. Just the assumption itself, and the habits that grow in the space where accountability should be. That's the part I want to sit with. Not the satisfaction of the moment, which I'd be lying if I said wasn't real, but the longer lesson, the one that takes more than a Christmas dinner to learn. When my daughter was young, I told her that integrity is what you do with information when nobody's watching. That's not a line I read somewhere. That's something I figured out the hard way, working for 2 decades alongside people who told the truth in meetings and shaded it in paperwork. I watched careers built on that shade. I watched some of them hold for a long time, but I also watched what happened when the light shifted. Conrad and Paulette had built something real, a business, a lifestyle, a reputation, and then they had gotten comfortable enough to get careless. The licensing lapse, the filing discrepancy, the numbered company. None of it was catastrophic on its own. But it was the kind of careless that accumulates. The kind that assumes the people around you are either too impressed or too polite to look closely. I was neither. I think about my daughter sitting at that table. She worked for everything she has. She sat down in that room with her whole honest life behind her, and somebody looked at that life and called it a deficit, and she was going to absorb it. She was going to tuck it somewhere and carry it because she is a gracious person, and gracious people often carry things they shouldn't have to. I am not always gracious. I am sometimes just her mother. What I want to say is this: preparation is not paranoia. Paying attention is not aggression. Knowing what you know and being willing to use it when someone you love needs you to, that is not a weapon. That is just showing up. It's the same thing I did when she was 7 and needed her lunch sorted out. The folder was just the grown-up version of walking into that school. And Conrad's mother, with her slow nod and her wine glass, she made a calculation that evening. She decided my daughter was a category and I was a decoration. Those were her choices. The consequences that followed were simply the shape of those choices returning to her. That's not fate. That's not some cosmic ledger. That's just how it works when you treat people like they're not watching. Eventually they show you that they were. I sleep well. My garden is already planned for spring. My daughter calls on Sundays. That is enough. That has always been enough.